On May 27, 1896, Louis d'Arget, convinced that thought produced luminous rays that could be captured on a photographic plate, stared for 30 minutes at a bottle of liquor. Then he put an unused plate into a bath of developer, placed his hand upon it and his forehead on his hand, all the time thinking deeply about the bottle he had just been staring at. After 5 minutes, he developed the plate. The first photo of thought, says the legend, while an arrow indicates where the bottle is. In another attempt by Louis d'Arget, a pianist concentrated on a portrait of Beethoven standing on the piano before him. The image was captured by placing a photographic plate directly on the subject's forehead. Contrary to these spiritual experiments, the conceptual photography movement of the 1960s didn't seek to photograph thought, but to induce thought with photography, to express concepts, not with words, but with pictures. But how do you do that? How do you represent the concept of a void, for example? In 1958, the painter Yves Klein invited the public to come and view the totally bare walls of an art gallery, the work on show being the void itself. The event was photographed, the pictures prove it took place, but no more, since there's nothing to see. 2 years later, Yves Klein chose to embody the void, not with an absence, but with a radical act that he put on the front page of a pastiche of a popular newspaper. The painter's leap from the first floor of a house, which only photography can capture, gives flesh to the concept, transforming it into a visible reality. Yves Klein did leap into the void on that day, but his friends were holding a stretched tarp below. Another photo of the same setting, taken a few moments later but with the same framing, enabled photographer Harry Schunk, the author of these pictures, to compose a montage, making this incredible feat possible. This manipulation was an exception. In 1971, when the same Harry Schunk photographed a performance by the American John Baldessari, there was no montage and no doctoring. Baldessari's hand appeared for real in front of the camera. This simple, childish gesture playfully incarnated a complex notion: the relationship between big and small, near and far, in the two-dimensional space of a picture. This creation is part of a collective work entitled Pier 18, grouping 27 artists on an abandoned waterfront in New York, a unique experiment which shows the diversity of 1970s conceptual art. The American Mel Bochner drew a 22.5-inch line on a pillar, a minimalist intervention which shows that in every picture, the real scale of objects is an abstract notion. Dutchman Jan Dibbets asked the photographer to capture passing time by taking 24 identically framed photos in 24 hours. The aim of New Yorker Vito Acconci's performance was, he said, to improve daily human relations. For this, he had himself photographed blindfolded, with his hands tied behind his back, and led by someone he can't trust to the edge of the pier. In the Pier 18 project, the 27 artists did their creations in front of a professional photographer who captured the results. But for other projects, they took their own pictures. In the performance Toe Touch, Vito Acconci did his stretching Instamatic in hand, taking one photo down and one photo up, and so on. The aim being to avoid all subjectivity and artistic intention by using an amateur camera. Throw. Put your hand with the camera behind your back and take a photo. Pretend to throw away the camera, then take a second photo. Photography designed as a simple activity with nothing to show or hide is the opposite of the notion of a work of art and its demands for technical and aesthetic mastery. That, despite the fact that Akanchi puts these fragments of raw reality into elegant, carefully balanced compositions. Blink. Walk in the street, trying not to blink. Each time you happen to blink, take a photo. The picture is taken blind. The open shutter replaces the closed eye. To Akanchi, the camera is an extension of the body, a prosthetic which shows him what he cannot see. With the photos he took in Passaic, New Jersey, the American Robert Smithson went even farther in the cult of the amateur camera. To him, these photos owed nothing to his subjectivity. They're pictures with the instamatic's influence, he said, suggesting the camera had a life of its own. But Smithson then totally changed the status of the banal photos by publishing them in a modern art review under the title, The Monuments of Passaic. Each feature of the cityscape was thus ennobled by the accompanying legend. The Great Pipes Monument. Monument with pontoons. The Sandbox Monument. And the Fountain Monument, a clear allusion to Marcel Duchamp's ready-made from 1917, a urinal renamed fountain placed on a pedestal and signed. A work of art, the great reference of the conceptual artists. With the little books he published in the 1960s, painter Edward Ruscha invented the photographic ready-made. Various Small Fires is a collection of pictures of small fires, some taken by Ruscha, others picked up here and there. Incongruously, the series ends with a photo of a glass of milk. In 26 gasoline stations, Ruscha was even more systematic. Having photographed 80 gasoline stations between Los Angeles and Oklahoma, he chose 26, eliminating, according to him, the too interesting photos, so as to show reality as it was with absolute neutrality. Each of his books is based on strictly applied rules. In Sunset Strip, a fold-out book some 8.5 meters long, he wanted to show all the buildings along a Los Angeles avenue, north side at the top, south side at the bottom. The pictures were taken with an automated camera set up in the back of a pickup truck. Ruscha was at the wheel, driving backwards and forwards along the avenue so as not to miss a single building. The montage is rudimentary. Ruscha wasn't seeking to create an illusion of continued reality because the reality of the building's facades was already an illusion. Artificial, he said, like the sets of towns and westerns with cardboard facades with nothing behind. John Baldessari's flip books are even more fun. This one, entitled A Sentence in 13 Parts, is composed of photograms taken from TV shows, each associated with a word, verbs one way, adjectives the other. Depending on which way you open it, you get different combinations. Baldessari likes the playful, chance, the unforeseeable. In this 1972 series, he threw 4 balls into the air 36 times, hoping they would form a square. He failed, but Baldassari kept 8 of the closest results. "I don't claim to do art," he would say later. "I just like having fun." Everything depends on what you mean by art. To Bruce Nauman, for example, art is everything an artist can do in the studio. Neck pull. Cockeyed lips, 1968. There's plenty of humor in these photos, which feature Nauman himself. In Self-Portrait as a Fountain, another homage to Duchamp, he seems to be spitting on good manners. While in Failing to Levitate, he plays with a double exposure to show himself failing in an impossible feat. A Buster Keaton of conceptual art. Later in the 1980s, Swiss artists Peter Fischli and David Weiss also played with the subject of falling. In the precarious assemblages of this series entitled Quiet Afternoon, familiar objects seem to challenge the laws of gravity. The photos, taken just before everything collapses, capture the concept of the heroic and absurd nature of balance. But more importantly, they're funny, in the way that only conceptual photography can be. Undoubtedly because it's the only photography not to take itself too seriously. Misunderstandings, a theory of photography, seems to be the exception. Mel Bochner's work from 1970 is a simple envelope containing 9 cards on which the artist wrote famous quotes about photography. Photography cannot record abstract ideas. Encyclopedia Britannica. I would like to see photography make people despise painting until something else will make photography unbearable. Marcel Duchamp. And although Mao Zedong unsurprisingly talks of the true function of revolutionary art, Proust does surprise us by declaring that photography is the product of complete alienation. 3 of the 9 quotes were totally invented, pointed out Bochner, but he didn't say which ones. Whatever the case, real or fake, he found them all stupid, even the one attributed to the philosopher Wittgenstein. The last card in the envelope is the negative of a photo by Bochner entitled Actual Size. The negative measures only a few centimeters, but the prints were actual size to the nearest millimeter. To make sure, Bochner introduced into the image of his own hand a line measuring exactly 12 inches, which the Photolab used to adjust the print to full scale. The same reference marker appears in a Bochner self-portrait. It's an ironic appraisal of the relativity of all representations, even those that seem to be the most objective. When the photo was shown in a gallery, a line drawn on the wall meant it could be hung at the artist's exact height. As for the quote from the Encyclopedia Britannica, most likely one of the 3 fake ones, Bochner pinned it to a wall and photographed it and printed it several times using old processes from the 19th century to show that while photography cannot record abstract ideas, it is nonetheless capable of producing a very concrete image. The only conceptual artist not to treat photography in a casual way was, as if by chance, a photographer, the Italian Ugo Mulas. In a series produced between 1970 and 1972, he posed questions on the basic processes of photography. Hence the title, Verifications. Verification number 9, the opening of the aperture which determines how much light will pass through the lens. In a matter of minutes, Mülas exposed a whole 36-photo film to a sun-drenched landscape. The variations in aperture take us from an artificial night to an overbright day and back again. Verification number 7, the darkroom, where the image goes from negative to positive, but where you can also create pictures without a camera by placing your hands, one covered in developer, the other in fixer, directly on photosensitive paper. Verification number 5, enlargement. Mülas photographed a stretch of clear sky, then blew it up to a point that reality totally disappears. All you can see is the photographic matter itself, the graininess of the film, which could just as well be a sky, a wall, or a face. The most radical of the verifications is the first in the series, entitled Hommage to Niepce. An unused film developed 36 black images, 36 photos that Mülas chose not to take as a protest against the proliferation of photographic images. Shams, as he called them, which had a tendency to replace the direct experience of the world. Sculptor Joseph Kosuth used much more distance in posing the question of the photographic sham, the relations that link it to a real object and the word that designates it. In 1965, he created an apparently simple installation. On a museum wall, he hung a reproduction of the definition of a word, chair, found in a French-English dictionary. Next to the definition, he placed a real wooden chair. He then photographed it and placed the life-size print next to the real chair. The confrontation between the three states of the object introduces a fourth state, that of the invisible chair, the concept. To Kosuth, the sole aim of art is to ask questions about the nature of art. The form of a work is merely the focus of this questioning. In the following years, Kosuth would reproduce the same scheme with various objects to show that they have no importance. What counts is the confusion created by the three states, each real in its own way, but one which is more real than the others. When Kosuth took photography as a subject in itself, the installation became all the more disturbing. For what's the difference in the relationship between reality and a photo of a photo? The same three-part scheme is found in Victor Bergen's 1986 series, which confronts photography with graphics and painting. The departure point is a work by Edward Hopper, Office at Night, painted in 1940. Bergen gave it a critical feminist reinterpretation by projecting parts of the painting onto the wall and opposing them with a photographed figure in the foreground. The 1940s fantasy of the oversexed submissive secretary is confronted with the image of a 1980s woman, emancipated and her own boss. A woman, according to Bergen, who is no longer a passive object of desire, but an active subject. Pictograms invented by Bergen and strips in the standard block colors give these pictures another level of interpretation. The strips represent the colors that have vanished from the original painting. The pictograms represent the outside world. Some relationships between the pictograms and the photos are easy to understand. The open box is a nod to the desk drawer. The key, like in fairy tales, opens the door to the forbidden. The woman can thus enter a mysterious unknown world where only the formal analogy between signs and cutout shadows reign. Far from the brutalist experiments of the previous decade, this work of deconstruction marked a return to aesthetics. The only reality here is that of the formal layout of the various elements in the two-dimensional space of a tableau. Like in painting, photography is just a surface. The real space it claims to capture is just an illusion, as this 1968 photo by the Dutchman Jan Dibbets illustrates. The white square in the center seems to have been drawn in after onto the photo, but it's an illusion of perspective. Dibbets actually drew a geometric figure on the floor of his studio, but not a square. A trapezium, which, seen at floor level and deformed by the wide-angle lens of the camera, takes on the appearance of a square. The simplicity of this visual paradox paved the way a few years later for much more spectacular creations, like this montage of photos over 3 meters high forming a curve on the wall that seems to vanish into infinity. The departure point was a photo of the horizon over the ocean, reframed in diagonal. The photo was stood on end, copied, and the two sections joined head to toe, so that the horizon was on both sides. Dibbets repeated the process with smaller and smaller fragments of the initial photo. The images, 12 in all, were then hung on the gallery wall in decreasing size order, forming a seemingly continuous line where sky and land blend together. Hence the title of the work, Sky, Land, Sky. In this photomontage from 2003, Dibbets assembled photos taken at the Zadkine Museum in Paris. A line in pencil perfects the circle and extends the space, creating a place halfway between reality and the ideal. It's a refined and agreeable image, light years away from the minimalist anti-aesthetics of early conceptual photographs when Baldessari was reframing the world with simple gestures. When attitude becomes form. In the 1970s, this conceptual art motto was provocation. Today, it's evident. The gesture is recognized as an art form in itself, even if it means giving the finger to the greats of the world, like Chinese artist Ai Weiwei in Study of Perspective. Or on the contrary, the gesture remains totally immobile, like with this other Chinese artist, Liu Bolin. His performance, which combines painting and photography, is an exercise in vanishing. By painting his clothes and face, the artist blends into the background. Only his feet remain visible, a way of stating that he's still rooted in the real world.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Begun in 2005 in Beijing in protest against his studio being demolished by the authorities, his series, Hide in the City, has become a work about the disappearance of the individual into the background, symbolic of society. Liu Bolin claims to draw inspiration from camouflage and snipers. Yet in his photos, he hardly looks like a soldier. Static and melancholic, he's more like a ghost surprised by a sudden dawn. And although it's paint that turns him into a phantom, only photography can capture the world between image and notion, presence and absence.